Let's talk about the DOGE dividend. We've recently seen the idea floating around that the Department of Government Efficiency could be issuing you and I, the taxpayer, $5,000 checks to reimburse us for all the reckless and irresponsible government spending that we've seen over the past couple of decades. In this video, we're going to talk about this idea. We're going to talk about if it's actually feasible, if it's something that could happen or really make sense. And we're going to talk about some of the economic impacts that we could see if this indeed does happen. Before I do get into the video, please make sure to like the video and also subscribe to the YouTube. I'm also going to put a QR code down below for a Bitcoin tip. If you want to support the channel, feel free to leave me a little Bitcoin tip. Now let's get into it. The idea of the $5,000 Doge dividend was first proposed by James Fishback, CEO of Azoria on X, and it quickly grabbed traction on the platform. We saw Elon come out and say that he liked the idea, and he talked to President Trump about it, and President Trump has been entertaining the idea, saying that he likes it. But is it really realistic? The $5,000 amount was calculated by taking that $2 trillion savings goal that the Doge team has and taking 20% of that, so $400 billion, and then dividing that by the 79 million households that we have here in the US. And with that, the checks would come out to a little over $5,000 per household. So I'm not sure if this would necessarily be reimbursement checks for everyone. It may just be reimbursement checks for all the tax-paying households out there. But when we look at this $2 trillion savings estimate, we have to ask ourselves if this is something that is actually attainable. So far, we've only really seen the Doge team cutting all these smaller expenses. I went on the doge.gov site, and they're cutting things that are around like $10 million. They're cutting these grants. They're cutting these contracts that are in the low millions of dollars. So I kind of doubt that they are going to be able to cut $2 trillion over the next year and a half before the department expires. So far, they've claimed that they've saved $55 billion, but many people believe that this number is overreported and they can't really account for that total $55 billion number. According to Bloomberg, they estimate that the Doge team has saved around $8.6 billion so far. And we're seeing a lot of these estimates for how much Doge is saved come in a lot lower than what they are actually claiming. If we do see these reimbursement checks happen, I wouldn't be surprised if they're a lot less than that $5,000 number and based on a more realistic savings goal. And really, if they do happen, I'm not sure when this would happen, but it shouldn't be based on an estimate. It should be based on the actual amount of money that this Doge department saves. So they can say that they're going to save $2 trillion, but we can't really know that's going to happen. And that seems like a very generous estimate. But let's say that these $5,000 checks do happen. Let's talk about what the impact will be on the economy. We can think back to 2020 when we saw all the markets crashing upon the arrival of COVID and we got all this stimulus money. What happened once we got that stimulus money? We saw asset prices take off. So let's look at a couple of charts here. This first one shows the S&P 500, and this is over the last 5 years, which kind of measures up perfectly because COVID was around 5 years ago, which is pretty hard to believe. But as you can see, in March of 2020, we took that dip, and then ever since then, we've been marching higher. Over that, those first couple of years after COVID, we really saw the stock market take off, and those who were left on the sideline like me really regretted not buying in and taking advantage of all that extra demand that was being pushed into the markets. We can also look at Bitcoin. This chart shows Bitcoin over the past 5 years, and as you can see, Bitcoin went on a nice run throughout 2020 and 2021, and then it looks like in 2022, Bitcoin crashed down to around $15,000. We had that big correction. Obviously, now we're up big. We're around 100K. But all that stimulus money really fueled these asset prices heading a lot higher. With the COVID stimulus, we had a $1,200 check in March of 2020, and then we had a $600 check in December of 2020. I believe there was another check in 2021, but it wasn't given to all taxpayers. And then, of course, we had all that stimulus for small businesses and other entities. So when we think about the amount of those checks, right, $1,200 and $600, and we think about how much the markets rallied off of that stimulus, think about how much we're going to see asset prices rise if we all get $5,000 checks. I know for me personally, if I get a $5,000 check, that money is going straight into Bitcoin. And I know there's a lot of other people out there who are thinking the exact same thing. So if this Doge dividend does happen, I expect asset prices to rise higher. And this may be one of the strategies for Trump and Elon and the Doge team. You know, people like it when they see their asset prices go higher. People like it when they're given $5,000. So really, I feel that this move, this idea is an idea to garner political support and really to support Trump and the Republican Party, right? If these reimbursement checks come out and the markets go up, everyone's going to be happy that their assets are going higher. Now, one of the things that I've seen people debating when it comes to this $5,000 Doge dividend is if it's actually inflationary. Because this is money that is being saved by the government that would have been spent somewhere else, right? Given to different departments or spent on different things by the government, I don't really think it's inflationary. I think these reimbursement checks will push up prices higher in the short term because you're giving the money directly to the consumer, to the spenders, rather than spending it in a different way and having it go through this sort of trickle-down process of coming into the economy. But because it's not additional spending, because you're just subtracting spending from one area and doing it in a different area, I believe that it's not really inflationary. It shouldn't lead to more quantitative easing, and it shouldn't really affect the money supply. And when I think of inflation, I do think of prices going up, but my main definition of inflation is the money supply growing, right? Things that'll make the money supply head higher. That's what really inflation looks like to me. And when we look at 2020, right, we had this additional spending, which was matched with quantitative easing by the Fed, and that really led to a lot of the inflation and the growth in the money supply that we saw. I want to cap off this video by talking about if this Doge dividend is actually a good idea. We know that the United States is over $36 trillion in debt, and really any money that this Doge team is saving should probably be going towards paying off that debt. I don't think the US is going to be able to pay off this debt. I think that everything's going to fall apart sooner than later. But just when you think about the debt issue, really any savings should be going towards that. Now, in principle, this kind of makes sense. We know that the government has been spending irresponsibly. They haven't done a very good job of reallocating those tax dollars that we pay to make society better. That's a big reason why we're seeing all these problems. People struggling to get by, people out on the streets, the homeless population growing, and really a lot of the taxpayers out there have been kind of screwed by the system. So I get the principle in wanting to reimburse the taxpayers for all this bad spending. Like I've said in this video, I don't really think the Department of Government Efficiency's $2 trillion savings goal is attainable. And because of that, I don't think that a $5,000 Doge dividend is really appropriate. What would make more sense to me is something like a $1,000 Doge dividend reimbursement check. And if you're the Trump administration, you also have to think, yes, this would probably send asset prices higher, which makes you look good. But if it sends the price for groceries higher, if it sends the prices for things that people need in their everyday life, that's not going to be a good look. You pair that with tariffs, which could send prices higher here in the US, and QE that we're going to have to do this year, which could send prices higher. and that may be a cocktail for something that you don't want, like prices really shooting up higher and the American population being pissed. So we will see if this happens. To me, it kind of just feels like an idea that could fizzle out or an idea that could morph into something else. But the real problem that I see with the idea is that it's based on a $2 trillion savings goal, which I don't think is going to happen. And if it does happen, good on the Doge team. I would be very impressed. But if they're going to do that, they're going to have to cut into some of these larger budget items like Social Security and Medicare, and that is going to be difficult for them to do. That's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope that these Doge dividend reimbursement checks happen. If they do, I'm putting that money straight into Bitcoin. If you didn't like and subscribe, please make sure to do that now. Really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon.